everybody, I'm Max.
I'm Andi.
Welcome to Breakdown.
Podcast series that breaks down all the latest crime and punishment news, but it does so with a twist.
Okay, so tonight we've got there's not just me and Andi tonight. We've got another person jumping on the podcast, the wonderful Devon Ferns. Devon, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are?
Yeah, lovely to be here, guys. Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. So I'm Devon. I'm currently working in a local youth justice service, working with children and young people, sort of either on the cusp or have entered the youth justice system. Done some sort of previous work with both Max and Andi. Contributed to the Good Prison Officer book. And multiple other different projects. Yeah, don't want to tease too much out, but thank you for having me.
Nice one. Cheers, Dev. It's a pleasure to have you on. Okay, so tonight's format's going to be a bit different than how it's been in the past. So I know that in the sort of the outline of the podcast, we say that it's all the crime and punishment news with a twist, and that is true. But tonight we're going to talk about something that's a little bit less of what you would normally understand as being sort of topical, mainstream media pieces, and we're going to sort of break down something that's a bit more specific. Now, so when me and Andi were talking about this podcast, just to sort of bring you into the picture a little bit, part of the thinking behind us doing the Breakdown podcast was that. Actually, a lot of the issues that we discussed by the mainstream media, but also the stuff that's influences practice and policy and research, the stuff that's maybe more hidden from the sort of general public, that stuff is usually only discussed by other people who are in that arena, i.e. people who have been through education systems, got certain qualifications, and then written other papers and all this sort of stuff. And we thought it'd be interesting to have an outlet where people with lived experience or practice experience, or not necessarily really high educational achievement, can talk about this stuff and in a way that's accessible and gets out to people. And we just think that's something that's important, and that's what we're going to do tonight. That's why we've invited Devon in, and we're going to discuss a paper that's come out by HMIP. Is that right, Andi?
That's absolutely right, Max. Great setting the scene there, as ever. So we are going to talk through His Majesty's Inspectorate and Probation. They inspect both probation and youth justice services. And early this month, they released the newest paper, which was to look at the evidence base around youth justice. So that was Professor Ursula Kilkenny. And the aim of the paper was to explore as much as possibly can the evidence base around youth justice, because, as she outlines in the paper, it's quite diverse and vast. So it's really difficult to kind of bring it all together. And Ursula did, I think, a pretty good job at configuring all of what's the best evidence and presenting it in the HMIP document. That can kind of highlight what best practice is, etc. Now, what we thought we would do as a result of what Max just outlined is just discuss it. So just discuss it in a way that's accessible to everybody. And as you will see on the screen now, there are 10 key themes that Ursula highlighted that could be presented to youth justice practitioners and policymakers. And what we're going to do now is just explore a couple of key themes from our perspective, both lived experience and practice experience.
So as you can see, there's 10 themes that have been highlighted by the research. Now, we can't possibly, we could, but no one what we're hearing, discuss these all night. So we've pulled out ones that we think either speak to us or are most relevant. So the first one being number 5. So that's when seeking to divert young people who have come into conflict with the law, it is important to take care of how and when to intervene, always ensuring to support positive outcomes. Okay, so that's interesting. I think so. Devon, you're working currently at the minute in youth justice. What comes to mind when you read that?
So for me personally, we're talking about a cohort of young people who are potentially, and from my experience, both personally and professionally, are currently sort of identifying as young people who either offend, or sort of, if we're looking at the relationships and the friends and the communities around them, they're growing up in these marginalised communities where that's sort of normalised. So for me, working in a youth justice service, this is something and somewhere that is set up to help and support them young people. So for us to emphasise them not coming to us and sort of getting them out as quick as possible seems just a little bit bizarre to me, considering the whole aim of our sort of service is to help them develop and grow into someone who's an healthy adult who doesn't want to sort of identify and offend, really. So for the evidence to sort of suggest that we don't want young people either here long or for them never to come to us seems just a little bit bizarre. Now, I know you've worked in the youth justice service before, Andi. I don't know about whether your thoughts are similar or if you sort of see this a little bit differently.
So the kind of, as the idea goes, it's the stigma of coming into a youth justice system, and actually what it does is it reinforces those self-perceptions that you were just talking about of a young person seeing themselves as, at one point when I first joined the youth justice system, it was called the youth offending teams, and we moved away from that because actually we thought that was actually harmful in terms of the kind of terminology offender. But that's just semantics. I felt at the time it makes absolutely zero difference. And I'll tell you why it makes no difference, because the kids say they're going to probation. And the one thing I've always found fascinating, right, is that whether it's youth offender, I used to have to tell them, so they'd be in my car and they'd bring up the mates and they'd be talking to the mates and be like, "You're down at probation." And I'd say, "You're not on probation." Do you know what I mean? I don't work in probation. I work in youth justice. But that tells me a lot about their backgrounds, their experiences, how they perceive the criminal justice system. They don't fragment it off. If they're coming into contact with the criminal justice system from their areas, they get more kudos for it being probation. So what we call it and how they perceive it, I think, are completely different. And so therefore I do think there is, I advocate the research and the evidence, because I do think it re-stigmatizes, it internalizes the behaviour, and it makes it more likely, as opposed to less likely, that those young people will get involved in offending behaviour. And we know this from just raw data. So first-time entrants have reduced between 2007, 8, 9, 10 to now by about 85%. So all those young people are not coming into contact with the youth offending service or the youth justice service anymore. And simultaneously, the numbers of incarcerated children have also significantly dropped. Now, what the youth justice system, in my view, is not admitting and holding its hands up to is the fact that over nearly 2 decades, we've been locking up children as a result of them coming into a service that we were purporting that it was meeting their needs, when it simply wasn't. And I think that's why it's really important for us to have these conversations, because now I don't work in it, I can talk openly about it, because it's been pulling the wool over the public's eyes for far too long. Because actually, if we weren't in the position that we're in now, we've arrived at the position that we're in now because we've got that background knowledge.
I think the point is within there as well, or there is a point in there of like how Devon, you said it's like it's a bit baffling, because I think it's almost a case of the truth hiding in plain sight there. Do you know what I mean? So by I mean, this is nothing new, but by them saying, we need to divert people away from the justice system wherever possible. Yeah. Now, the reason they're saying that is because being involved in justice systems, whether it be youth or adult, is harmful. It has a net harm. That's why you divert people away from it. So I think there's something about like the truth in plain sight there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, which kind of leads us into the next point. So the second topic that we thought was really important to kind of discuss here is number 6. And number 6 is the development of positive relationships between young people and adults can prevent offending, engaging in further offending behaviour. So the positive relationships between adults and young people, in particular youth justice practitioners and young people, is very important. Not just in youth justice, the argument is that in probation and detention. Now, the idea that we need that in an evidence-based document is partly baffling. But I suppose I'll come over to you guys. Like, what's your first, when you read that about positive relationships between let's say what it is, criminal justice staff and young people and adults that come into the criminal justice system, what's the first thing that comes into your mind? So I'll start off with you, Max.
Well, I think so. So obviously it's talking about the importance of the positive relationships, and if you're reading through that, but also the other stuff that's available, you know, it sort of adds this positive relationships as almost like a bit of an add-on. So we'll talk about adversity and background and safeguard, and like, importance of positive relationships. You know, that's the key. Or they'll even say something like, the key to this and that, you know, is like positive relationships. But then they don't. I think what isn't explored is the how. Like, I think it's really easy. Like, all right, yeah. So it's like, okay, reading this document, right? Okay, so I'm looking. So I'm a practitioner. I'm reading it. I'm thinking, right, okay. So I'll do a bit of this. I'll do a bit of that. I'll do a bit of positive relationships. All right, scan through. Like, how? Do you know what I mean? It's like being told, right? Yeah? It's like so you want to build a house, right? And then you get like an instruction manual. Right, and you're like, right, yeah, I'm going to build my house. Yeah, so you get the instruction manual. Being like, number 1, you know, drive your van. Okay, drive your van. You know, number 2, park the van. Right, park the van. Number 3, take your tools out. Take your tools out of the van. All right, take the tools out of the van. Number 4, build a house. You know what I mean? It's like, what? You know what I mean? Tell me, man, how do I build this house? And I think, and it's funny, isn't it? Because it's in 2 ways. Like, Andy, you say it's baffling that not baffling, you said, but it's like baffling it's even there. I'm more baffled there's not a whole paper about exactly the intricacies of what it takes to build a positive relationship. You know what I mean? What about you, Dev?
Personally, I think that anybody who's worked with, I mean, especially the area that we're talking about, young people involved in sort of criminality and stuff like that, I think, to be honest, anybody who's worked in like a public sector will tell you that without a relationship, it ain't gonna work. It doesn't have to be. It doesn't even have to be a criminal justice setting for you to know that. And to think that it's literally been wrote in 1 sentence is a little bit astonishing. So for me, it's more like, yeah, we know we need a relationship, but what makes the best relationship? What is it that I need to do to make sure I've captured that best relationship to make the best work done? Does having to get an assessment that takes probably 3 weeks out of the 4 weeks that I've got in this whole time scale with this kid, is that enough time for me to build that relationship? I don't know. It's not been identified. What is it about the worker and the young person or the child that you're working with? Is there anything in the structure? I mean, in my opinion, I don't think there is. I don't think that the structure that we work in does sort of lend its stand to the workers who are trying to build these relationships, because it's not really looked at like it should, if that makes sense.
So yeah, definitely. So can I just quickly go back? So in the last topic we discussed, diversion, there's a section at the bottom that says, that's talking about interventions, right? It's about diversion and stuff like that. And it says that specific interventions may be needed for specific cohorts of young people, including those in marginalised and particularly vulnerable groups, and those who engage in serious or violent offending. Right now, yeah. Again, like the instructions, the questions is how. What are the qualities of a youth justice practitioner that would lend them to be able to engage with, connect with, and work with that group?
So first off, this was the whole point about connecting with young people in trouble, right? Because it like you just outlined it with your example, which is a perfect analogy, by the way, is that if we're taught, this is how inequality infiltrates the criminal justice system, but in particular the scholarship, right? Is that it's a complete blind spot for some of these individuals, because we're totally ignoring the fact that social marginalisation is a central function, right, of the criminal justice system. Now you might say, what outline that for me, Andy? Okay, so even if we look at the literature, we can go back. I mean, I'm doing a PhD now looking at this particular issue of lived experience, peer mentors, or whatever in the criminal justice system. You can go back to the 60s, to the 50s actually, when Donald Cressy mentioned reflexive reformation. That came from like this differential association theory, like how people can proactively kind of pass on, you know, not reoffending values and cultures. In the 60s, Frank Reisman did the helper therapy principle, and the list goes on. You know, David Brown theorized the professional X, that was more in kind of therapy and recovery services. Shad Maruna and Thomas Labelle talked about wounded healers. So that was people that had been to prison helping people that were on release from prison. So the reason why I outline that out is because where's that in this evidence-based document? You know, when we're thinking about how inequality infiltrates, it's because if children like us three have all experienced are coming from pockets of society that are socially excluded, then you walk into a system, a bureaucratic system that is predominantly a middle-class culture. Now, I worked in youth offending, right, for many a year. Not everybody in there was middle class. In fact, I would argue lots of them were working class, but it's a middle class culture because it's working for the local authority, right? So we need to start talking about that, because we need representation of people that come from the pockets of society where these children are coming in to legitimize authority. So even in the document in number 6, it talks about so young people's negative interactions with adults, particularly with police officers and other professionals within the justice system, can result in breaches of their rights, as well as diminished acceptance of their legitimacy of authority. Now, that's already that. If they're in the youth justice system, done, that's gone. They're already beyond that. So the question is then, how do we create an authority that's legitimised for children that are experiencing social marginalisation in disadvantaged communities? And if we're creating this evidence base, which by the way is an amalgamation of all the evidence base, and completely missing the fact that you need to be recruiting people that have got lived experience of coming from the youth justice system, I think that document's falling well short of the how. So you can say trusting relationships are important, but the how becomes about group membership and identity, and recognizing that if you're middle class, and it might sound a little bit controversial this, but if you're middle class and you're working if you're Rishi Sunak, let's take the Prime Minister. Is the Prime Minister coming in his suit going to be best placed to walk into a prison and work with a load of young people in prison? I think most people will probably say probably not. So then clothing matters, presentation matters, your political ideologies probably matter, and your social class matters. Now, it doesn't mean middle class people can't work with this cohort of young people. Of course they can. But if it's represented to a young person from their perspective of people that are kind of quite far away from their experience of social marginalisation, I mean, that's a problem. And I think it's something that we need to talk about.
Okay, so that brings us on to number 7. So number 7 is the use of detention must be avoided, and where used, it must be adapted to children's needs, with a focus on equipping children with the health, education, and life skills that ensure their safe return to their communities. Okay, so the use of detention must be avoided, and when used, it must be tried to be used to you know, equip and be positive and stuff like that. So what do you think about that, Devon?
So when I read this paper, it says and it outlines there that it should be delivered by what they call, in quotes, specialists, and that's what sort of stood out for me, if I'm being honest, because when I sort of reflect on my experiences of being inside, I think that what does a specialist person look like? What does a specialist mean to me? And to be honest, I think it didn't really matter about the title, to be honest, as long as they could connect with me and as long as they could do the right things and sort of be child first, listen to me, understand about where I come from, why it is that I react in certain situations, sort of get to know me and abide by them sort of child first principles. It didn't really matter whether they were a screw, an education teacher, a substance misuse worker. It could have been sort of anybody who was able to connect with me. So I think defining them as sort of specialists, I think it's quite broad, if that makes sense, to be honest. I don't know what you think along them lines, Andi.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, it goes back to the bit about like labelling youth offending, youth justice, semantics. I mean, you need to have specialist workers. If a child has got, mental health needs, or they're coming off substances when they come to custody or stuff like that, it's really important. But I agree with you in the sense that what does specialist mean? I mean, going back to the document, it says in the beginning of this, under the evidence base of number 7, it is widely accepted that depriving children of their liberty is not in their interests. Again, I sometimes I understand that when we're explaining these things, you have to set the context right. But positive relationships are really important, and depriving children of their liberty isn't in their best interest. I mean, for heaven's sake, do you know what I mean? Like, it's like the fact that they need stating must say something, I think, about the youth justice system and the way it functions. But for me, when it talks a little bit about education in custody, it is important. And I remember being put in like really low level qualifications. I think about it like I'm doing a PhD now, so I must have had, I did have something about me then, but the qualifications that they gave me, and I've still got them now actually, they just weren't stimulating for me as a 17-year-old. So I do think they've got to think outside the box. I didn't know that criminology as a field existed. Now, I literally believe if they'd have introduced me to criminology when I was 17 in a young offenders institution, I think I might have bit at that. I think that might be something that would interested. So I think we shouldn't underestimate what the young people in custody are capable of.
Definitely not.
And do you know what? And I think that goes. You see that across the board, from the youth estate to the adult estate. The imagination of what people think the potential of people who are in custody or just even within the justice system are capable of is for the whole so constrained. Do you know what I mean? To like the very like the upper levels of level 1 paint and decorating. Do you know what I mean? And there's nothing wrong with paint. There's nothing wrong with paint and decorating. But like you say, Andi, do you know what I mean? There's like we shouldn't be afraid to challenge people.
Right.
Okay, so that brings us to the last one that we're going to discuss. So that's number 9, and that is that young people's lived experiences are invaluable for policymakers seeking to understand the nature of youth offending, and their views are indispensable for developing effective and child-centred responses to offending behaviour. Now, I think that's really interesting. I think that's really interesting, especially is the last paragraph in the conclusion talks about to promote an approach to evidence-based policymaking as a collaborative endeavour, one that is shared between academia and decision makers in youth justice practice and policy, with a focus on the young people at the heart of this process. Now, what I find interesting about that, I mean, so yeah, of course, young people that are in the justice system right now, of course, it is important to include them and co-create with them and do collaborative work and yada yada yada. I mean, like 100% course, right? But what's interesting, it's almost like a paradox for the youth justice system, is that young people only stay young people as long as they're young people, right? Yeah. So that their young people's ness expires Yeah. So a young person who's going through the justice system because of their background, because of their lived experience and all these sort of things, you know, they say that their views and their experience is invaluable. Yeah. That is invaluable. Now, the minute that they turn 18, right, and that they're out of the youth justice system, they become valueless. Yeah. Because they're no longer young people in the youth justice system. Now, they still carry that same experience. They still carry that same knowledge. They still carry them same views, cultural backgrounds, all these things. If anything, just the older they get, the more that perspective will mature and the brain will develop and all these sorts of things. But the minute they hit 18, they're out. You know, and they are now the adults problem, you know, their probation, and if they come back in, the probation's problem or the adult estate or whatever the case may be. You know, if anything, you know, and Devon, I know you can probably speak to this, but you know, if anything, if you know, people want to collaborate with you, co-create with you, you know, you might turn 19 and you need to go through 10 different risk assessments and get signed off and character references just to step a foot in the building. You understand? You know what I mean? But you're like, bro, 3 months ago I was invaluable. What changed? Yeah. And then they want to know, and then sometimes people scratch their heads about, you know, it says earlier on, we need to engage marginalised people, we need to divert pathways and this and that. But the minute someone turns 18 and they're out of the youth justice system, their invaluable knowledge becomes worthless.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think that's, I don't know what, it might be slightly hyperbolic that, but I'm just sort of trying to put the point across that there is a problem here with perspective on only young people and they being young people as having this value. Do you understand what I'm saying?
100%. 100%, Max. So yeah, I think you've wrapped up very, very nicely there, man, to be fair. So if I was to sort of summarise a little bit then, I think the document were a good read. Don't get me wrong, definitely a good read. It sprung a lot of questions for me. I think it outlined a lot of the obvious things that every sort of practitioner knows already. But I think the main point for me is very similar to what you said, Max, about the young people, how it goes from being so important and how they want to include everything that they've got to say. But then the second they get to 18 and they get sort of past that, you're jumping through lots and lots and lots and lots of hoops. Whereas this is where I feel sort of lucky, really, and very blessed to meet the right people at the right time who was prepared to jump through them hoops to get me into the position where I am now. It's just very disappointing to see that, unfortunately, we're not seeing many other, if any, young people getting that same opportunity. And to think that it goes from having their voice at the heart of this whole structure to not being relevant at all, not having them people even regulate the service, which is very, very interesting, but that's probably for another podcast, probably another whole conversation, is absolutely astonishing. So yeah, from me, I just want to say thanks for having me. Thank you for having me on tonight.
You are very welcome. You have absolutely contributed to the conversation, Devon, as ever, our youngest team member. So just to summarise from my perspective too, looking at the conclusion, one of the things that jumped out to me when I was reading it is that so when they look at the evidence, they're saying that the messages are loud and clear, although there are large and smaller studies. That the messages are loud and clear, that they remind us repeatedly that young people who come into contact with the law are disadvantaged in multiple and complex ways, and it has impacts on individual, family and community in their circumstances. But most importantly, disproportionate impact and equitable outcomes are widespread. So it's a kind of recognition that there's disparity in outcomes between, you know, people that do and don't come into the contact with the youth justice system. But feeding a little bit onto what both of you have already highlighted, they say Ursula Kilkenny states that in conclusion, this paper highlights how the ultimate goal of any youth justice system can be achieved. That is to ensure young people not only enjoy safe and healthy childhood, that they reach adulthood and beyond as happy and healthy adults. supported to play their part in society, which is interesting because the youth justice system, in my opinion, both as a young person that came into contact with it and as a practitioner, it's very limited in the role that it plays in achieving those things for young people, being honest. It also seeks to promote an approach to evidence-based policy making as a collaborative endeavour, one that is shared between academia and decision makers in youth justice practice and policy. The reason I highlight that is because if there's these equitable outcomes, right, from these children that are disadvantaged and alienated and marginalised, then when you're collaborating to create good practice between academia and policymakers, because of those equitable outcomes, you're almost omitting that group of people out of the conversation. And the youth justice system gets away with this because what it does is it says, we'll include, and like Max eloquently outlined, we will include the voice of the children and young people that come into it. But once you're beyond the system, adios, see you later, amigo. Because the truth is, they are very unlikely, those individuals, to become academics and policymakers. So I've got some work to do in the youth justice system, as far as I'm concerned, to start recognising that people's voices don't just matter when they're 18. In the care review, they included care experienced people in the review that were adults because they recognise that the care experience isn't something that just leaves you when you're 18 or 20. It stays with you for life, as Max outlined earlier. So that brings the conversation to a conclusion. And please, 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 as ever, like and subscribe so that you can join us. And whenever we release new content, it arrives on your device.